Please join me in welcoming Pamela Gillies. In Scotland, they call her the principal. Here in New York, it's president and vice chancellor of Glasgow Caledonian University, and Nicola Sturgeon, MSP, the First Minister of Scotland.
Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, it's such a privilege as well as a pleasure to welcome you to GCU New York this evening for the Caledonian Lecture with the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon, MSP. Our First Minister graduated in law from the University of Glasgow and worked as a solicitor in Stirling and Glasgow before joining the Scottish National Party. Actually, I think you joined the Scottish National Party quite young, didn't you, before that? You were only 16. So, you know, they put the wrong note in here. During her steady rise through Scottish politics, she became known as a progressive politician with a commitment to fairness and justice. Her party's success in the recent UK election can be attributed not just to her warm and engaging personality, but to the way she clearly communicated a positive vision for the future. As a university for the common good, Glasgow Caledonian University is dedicated to working for a better Scotland and a better world. One way we do this is through our work with the United Nations and their Principles for Responsible Management education programme. Now, this programme is championed by our Glasgow School for Business and Society, which seeks to produce business leaders who are conscientious global citizens. Our First Minister is a lifelong and passionate advocate for social justice and for the transformative power of education for all, whatever background or circumstances we might come from. And I'm sure you all share my anticipation of her insights this evening on the relationship between business and society. Now, after her speech, the First Minister will be joined on stage in conversation with the extremely distinguished journalist and biographer, the BBC North American editor, John Sopel. So welcome, John, tonight as well. But first, let me ask you to warmly welcome the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon, MSP, to deliver the Caledonian Lecture entitled Business and Society.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Pamela, for that introduction. I have to say, I think now that you have a campus here in New York City, you really must adopt the American nomenclature, and because I think President Gillis really has quite a ring to it. I've spent the day being slightly confused by the terminology. I visited a school in Brooklyn. We may hear more about that when we get into discussion later on. And of course, the head teacher is called principal, and in university, principal is president. So I definitely think you should take that home with you and see how it goes down amongst your fellow university principals rather well, I would think. Anyway, thank you very much for that warm introduction. You're absolutely right to say I joined the Scottish National Party when I was 16 years of age. And I have to say the 5 years since then have really flown by. It's hard to believe it has been quite so long. I've had a great day in New York. I arrived in New York yesterday. I've had a great day of engagement today, flying the flag for Scotland with business, education, health visits, but we'll hear more about that when I get into discussion with John later on. But let me say I'm particularly pleased to be here tonight at the New York campus of Glasgow Caledonian University. Glasgow Caledonian, of course, is the first Scottish university to establish a campus here in New York. It is an absolutely fantastic development, and I congratulate you, Pamela, and your colleagues on your foresight in doing this. I'm led to believe that during Scotland Week, when this wonderful space was used for an exhibition of the work of the fabulous Scottish artist Gerald Burns. This wall here had a life-size portrait of me on it, so I'm glad to say you are being spared that this evening, and that is entirely a comment on me, not the wonderful work of Gerald Burns. But I'm delighted to be here tonight, and thank you for giving me such a warm welcome. As Pamela said in her introduction, the theme of this discussion this evening is business for society. And I can't think of a more appropriate venue for tonight's event, since, of course, the work of Glasgow Caledonian University, both in Glasgow and here in New York, and in its many collaborations right across the world, is defined by an incredibly strong commitment to wider society and to the common good. That commitment is demonstrated by your Fair Fashion Centre, which I know promotes ethics and sustainability in the fashion industry. It shone through the work of somebody that all of us in Scotland knew very well, the late Professor Ailsa Mackay, who made such a major contribution, not just to this university, but to public policy in Scotland, someone who is very, very sadly missed indeed. And, of course, your commitment is also exemplified by your Chancellor. Mohammed Yunus is known around the world for his work to promote equality, sustainability and social justice. So for all of these reasons, and no doubt for many more reasons, this is a great venue and a great university to be making this address in front of this evening. And I want to start this evening with something that Mohammed Yunus said when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. He pointed out then that many, many business people don't just want to make a profit. Although, of course, it's very important to point out there is nothing wrong with business people wanting to make a profit. But as well as that, most business people, and this is certainly true in my experience, also want to do good for the people that they serve, and they want to do good for the world. Like many of us, they want to play their small part, some a very big part, in making the world a better place. And denying that side of their motivation, as Mohammed Yunus said, insulates entrepreneurs from all political, emotional, social, spiritual, environmental dimensions of their lives. Now, we all know that the business sector is absolutely essential for our society. It's businesses, strong, dynamic, successful businesses that create the wealth and generate the jobs and the prosperity that we all depend on. Without that wealth creation and prosperity and jobs, we wouldn't be able to provide the healthcare and the education and the many assets of our society that we value so highly. And of course, in Scotland, we're already hugely fortunate to have a strong, vibrant, competitive, growing economy with internationally recognised strength in a range of sectors, the creative industries, life sciences, energy, tourism, food and drink, to name just a few of the strong, growing sectors of the Scottish economy. And the government I am privileged to lead is determined to do everything we can to encourage and to support that economy. We support good infrastructure, skills and innovation, some of the essential tools that businesses need to thrive and to succeed. And we support and promote Scottish exports right across our globe. We also support investment into Scotland. Indeed, that's one of the purposes of my visit here to New York this week, one of the great business centres of the world. Scotland is, in fact, the most successful part of the United Kingdom when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment outside of London and the southeast of England. So we've much to celebrate, but we want to do more. We want to succeed even more in the future. So the message I bring with me to the United States this week is essentially a simple one. Scotland is open for business. We are an environment in which it is fantastic to work, to live, to study, to invest, to create jobs. And that's the message that we send out across the United States and the wider world. And we're very proud of the support we give to businesses. So if you're looking for somewhere for your business to grow, somewhere for your business to prosper and make money, Scotland is a very good place for you to consider. One final point I would make on that, as I punt everything that Scotland has to offer, is that relatively speaking, we're also a very cost-effective place to do business. You know, it's somewhere in the region of 30 to 40% less expensive to start up and run an operation in Scotland than it would be in major international centres like London and Paris. So we have absolutely everything going for us. So please feel free to consider your investment. But I want to come back to Mohammed Yunus and something that he did, which I think is very important. He recognised that and recognises that the profit motive is important. Of course it is important, but it's not everything. The vast majority of companies, the vast majority of entrepreneurs have a very genuine interest in the wider community, and indeed this city, with its history and reputation and current reality of generous philanthropy, is a good example of just that. People wanting, yes, to create wealth, but then to use that wealth for the greater good of society. Business people have a genuine interest in making our society better. And Glasgow Caledonian's Business for Society course looks, for example, at social enterprise in some considerable detail. So I want to mention that this evening as one example which I think is likely to grow in importance in future. The Scottish Government established a strategy for supporting social enterprises in Scotland in our very first year in office. We value highly the benefits that they bring to local communities. We value highly the innovation that they create by often establishing a very different business model for goods and services. Social Bite, I don't know if anybody here has heard of Social Bite. It's a Scottish social business which provides catering services. And I mention it specifically because it was directly inspired by Mohammed Yunus's work. A quarter of the staff who work for Social Bite are people who were formerly homeless people. Every penny of the profits that Social Bite makes goes into good causes. Back in December last year, they ran a campaign that was aimed at providing Christmas lunches for homeless people. That campaign was so successful that it attracted 35,000 donations, which means that they weren't just able to provide lunches on Christmas Day or over the Christmas period. They can now provide lunches for homeless people right throughout the year. I have to tell you, this may be of interest to some people in the audience, that Social Bite is currently running a competition in which the first prize is a lunch in one of their cafes later this year with George Clooney. So if anybody here wants details on how to enter that competition, for a small fee I'm prepared to share them, although I should advise you that the winner of the competition has obviously already been selected, because it would be completely unacceptable for the First Minister of Scotland not to greet George Clooney when he came to Social Bite. Anyway, Social Bite is just one of thousands of social enterprises in Scotland, and the number continues to grow. And of course, we're keen to learn from other people's experiences as well. We established the first ever Social Enterprise World Forum back in 2008, and we encourage international social enterprises to base themselves in Scotland. But we also know that all businesses, not just social enterprises, have an interest in wider society. After all, as I was saying earlier on, businesses are not separate from the society in which they sit. They're part of that society. Managers, shareholders, board members all benefit from good quality public services, from high quality infrastructure. They benefit from vibrant cities, places not just to live in, but to work and play in as well. And they benefit from beautiful landscapes. And so most businesses, in my experience, genuinely want to make that wider contribution to society. It's good for their reputation, it's good for their sense of values, because it's good for society as a whole, but it's also, because of that, in their own long-term interests. It is, in short, good for the bottom line of businesses as well. Of course, some companies, completely understandably, might need some help or support in order to do the right thing, or might take some convincing that it won't hurt their profitability or their competitiveness. So the starting point of the Scottish Government in looking to create a fairer society as well as a wealthier economy, our starting point is to encourage as many businesses and entrepreneurs as possible to act out of enlightened self-interest. We work to create a dialogue, a partnership with them to help them do just that, because at the heart of our economic strategy as a country is this, in my view, self-evident truth that a fairer society and a stronger economy are not competing objectives. They are two sides of the same coin. If we have a stronger economy creating more wealth, then clearly we are going to be able to invest in the social assets that mean so much to us. But if everybody in our society has the ability to contribute, to give of themselves, to make sure that their skills and their talents are used to full potential, then the economy is going to be more productive and more innovative and more successful as well. So that's the philosophy, the ethos at the heart of the Scottish Government's economic strategy. And to give one example of how we're giving life to that ethos and that principle, let me look at a policy that is very important to us in Scotland, the extension of a living wage. The living wage in Scotland and the UK is based on research calculating how much money households need to maintain a minimum standard of living. Not a luxurious standard of living, but a minimum standard of living. In Scotland, it's currently set at £7.85 an hour. That's approximately $12.10, which is significantly higher than the minimum wage of $10 an hour. Now, the living wage is obviously something that is good for employees, it's good for society as a whole, but we also believe it's good for individual companies as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, we published some research on the impact and the practicalities of companies introducing the living wage for their employees. And that research found that for many individual firms, the higher wage costs that can sometimes understandably be a barrier to companies paying the living wage were actually covered by increased productivity, lower absenteeism, and higher staff retention. And we've had a fantastic response from companies to the campaign to extend the reach of the living wage. When I became First Minister last November, I set a target. You know, politicians like setting targets. I set a target of having 150 employers signing up for living wage accreditation within 1 year. That target's already been exceeded. More than 200 employers have already signed up within just 7 months, and we're now aiming to reach 500 employers by the end of next March. We've also established a Fair Work Convention, bringing together trade unions, employers and the wider public sector in Scotland. And the purpose of that Fair Work Convention is to encourage workforce policies that prioritise innovation, higher productivity and better employee engagement, to use collaboration as a way to increase the productivity and the competitiveness of businesses. And again, the message at the heart of this is that progressive policies can be good for individual businesses and by extension the wider economy as well. And as an employer ourselves, the Scottish Government tries to be a role model. We try to lead by example. And so last week, the Scottish Government became an accredited living wage employer, and Glasgow Caledonian University is also an accredited living wage employer. So that's leading by example. We also, a couple of weeks ago, launched something called the Scottish Business Pledge, which again is a good illustration of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of the pledge, which is entirely voluntary for companies, they're not forced to sign up to it, it's not mandatory, but voluntarily we're asking companies to commit to paying the living wage and to commit to some other characteristics of a progressive and competitive workplace. For example, to commit to greater gender equality in the decision-making of their companies, to commit to greater employee participation, prompt payment of suppliers so that companies right through our supply chains benefit from that as well, to commit to innovation and to growing international markets. We are a successful country when it comes to exporting. Food and drink, for example, is one of our great export strengths, but the vast majority of companies in Scotland still don't export at all. We see internationalisation and the innovation that leads to internationalisation as a key focus as we seek to grow our economy further. And in return for companies voluntarily signing up to progressive policies that help them but help society as well, our part of the bargain is that we as government will do everything we can to create a competitive business environment, to help businesses to grow, to innovate and to export, to support, in short, a successful economy. And that pledge enshrines the sense of shared endeavour, of common purpose that we want to build with our business community. And major companies like Virgin Money, GlaxoSmithKline have already made the decision to sign up to the business pledge, and I'm confident that in the months to come we'll see even more take that step, just as we've seen so many companies sign up to become living wage employers. So to conclude my opening remarks this evening, I believe this work that we're doing has a distinct Scottish context, but it also addresses issues which are of international concern. You know, I leave New York tomorrow night to travel to Washington, DC, and in Washington I'll be taking part in a session at the World Bank on equality and the economy, and having meetings at the IMF as well. And the reason for all of that is the large amount of international evidence we now have, which demonstrates and illustrates that inequality isn't just bad for the individuals that are trapped in that inequality, it's bad for our economy as well, because individuals trapped in inequality are not contributing their full potential. You know, there was IMF research which examined 173 countries over 50 years. That research shows that more unequal countries tend to have lower and less durable economic growth. So the evidence is there. Our challenge now in Scotland, and I would argue across the world, is to act on that evidence. And so a strong, productive, competitive economy and a fairer society are not competing objectives. That's at the heart of my message this evening. These are complementary objectives, and it stands to reason that all of us, government, businesses, the trade unions, the third sector, the public sector, all of us have an interest in creating a wealthier, fairer, stronger society. And I very much see in the world we live in today, where in many countries there are healthy and vibrant debates about the role of government, I very much see one of the purposes of government as being to build that sense of partnership and to foster that sense of partnership which can help us to achieve those aims. And we can do that not just by appealing to the heart, but appealing to the head as well, by making the hard economic case for more progressive practices. And by doing that, we will help businesses to benefit society, and we can ensure that a strong society brings real benefits for our businesses and for the economy as well. So thank you very much indeed for listening. And now, as previously billed, please welcome John Sopel, the BBC's North American editor, to the stage. He promises me he's going to be gentle with me in this interrogation, so we'll see if he keeps that promise.
It's lovely to see you again. We once spent a night together in Glasgow. Well, that could be phrased more felicitously. It was the night of a by-election in an electoral district in Scotland, and the result, I think, had been due at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it came at about 4:30 in the morning, and we didn't have anything to fill with but conversation for 3.5 hours, and with the other party representatives as well. And actually it was a night of a spectacular victory, and I kind of look back on that night now in 2008 and think, really, was that the first rumblings of the earthquake that we saw kind of come to kind of the extraordinary result that we saw last month in the UK general election? We'll talk about all that in a minute. First of all, how's your day been in New York?
Well, it has been great in New York. It's been really busy. I started off at 5 a.m. this morning and had a fantastic hour-long appearance on Bloomberg surveillance. And that was an opportunity to do what I've just done there tonight, to send the message that Scotland is open for business. So that was an early start, but a productive start. But I've had some great visits today. I've met a couple of businesses, US companies that have just announced today or over the next couple of days new investment in Scotland, which is very, very welcome. I visited a wonderful school in Brooklyn earlier on today to look at the kind of interventions and initiatives that they've been adopting to try to raise standards in education, to raise attainment and to close the attainment gap between kids in our most affluent areas and least affluent areas. And then I was at a hospital this afternoon that's got some links with York Hill Children's Hospital in Glasgow, so it's been a busy old day.
Fantastic. Let's get to the speech, which was fascinating. Do you see Scotland as something of a sort of petri dish at the moment, where you are trying to do something about the economy that's very different from maybe what the conventional social democratic parties are offering at the moment? Because, when in an age where politicians are accused of offering nothing distinctive, your message in the election was very, very distinctive.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are trying to do something different, and I tried to outline what that is in my speech tonight. We're, in all my time in politics, which I have to say is considerably longer than 5 years now, but in all the 20, 25 years I've been in politics, the traditional wisdom has been, as a politician, you're either on the left and you support social justice, or you're on the right and you support the economy and business and economic growth, and the two really can't cohabit. You have to pick one or the other. And what we're trying to do in Scotland, as I've just said there, is completely challenge that orthodoxy. These are not competing objectives. If we want to have a stronger economy, we need a vibrant business base, but if we want to have vibrant businesses, they have to have skilled and productive and well-paid and motivated workers to create the success for them. So we're trying to bring those two objectives together, and we think the evidence, the international evidence, backs that. If we have a more equal and a fairer society, we'll have a stronger economy and vice versa. We're not getting that in any other part of the UK just now, so I hope Scotland can show some leadership, and if we can prove that it works and it's successful, then I hope it's not too long before others follow.
And you did hugely well with your message against austerity and the need for cuts and all the rest of it. Tsipras did very well in Greece. It's hardly a model, is it?
Well, do you know, I was reading some research published just two or 3 days ago by the IMF, and it was saying, and nobody kind of describes the IMF as some great left-wing force in the world, but it was saying, countries should not be, determined to cut to get debt down. If they've got fundamentally strong economies, then they should be investing for growth. And, I did, and the SNP did stand very strongly against continued austerity in the election, partly because the austerity policies that we've had in the UK for the past 5 years have brought with them real pain, often to the wrong people, to those that frankly didn't cause the financial crash and didn't cause the recession. The biggest burden of austerity has been borne by disabled people, by women with children, single parents. So that's the first reason I think continued austerity was wrong. But the second reason, and arguably one that should be even more powerful to governments that want to grow their way out of debt, is that those austerity policies held back the growth in our economy because we weren't investing in infrastructure and innovation and skills, the kind of things that you need to do to have a strong economy. So I put forward an alternative view.
You quote the IMF. I went to the spring meeting in Washington. George Osborne was there. Christine Lagarde was falling over herself to say how marvellous the British economy has been run.
Well, Christine Lagarde can speak for herself. I'm not going to try and speak for her, and she's a formidable and very impressive woman. But, much of what the IMF is right, the research I spoke about a second ago, makes, I think, the very sensible case. Am I sitting here saying debt and deficit, we should just ignore it, and that it's not really important to get debt and deficit down? I'm not saying that.
But the way in which it's done and the pace at which it's done should be consistent with a cohesive society, but it should also be consistent with the kind of policies you need to grow the economy, because fundamentally and ultimately what allows you to get debt and deficit down is growing the revenues through having a strong growing economy, and that's at the heart of the case that we argue.
I want to come to the sort of current state of politics in the UK. I mean, lots of Americans, when I told them I was doing this, they said, what is all this about this massive SNP success? I thought they had a referendum and you lost. So if we were to judge the last 12 months, would you say they've been a success or a failure?
A fairly successful failure, I think would be my answer to that. As failures go, it had its sweet, look, I'll be serious about this. I've spent all of my adult life arguing the case that Scotland should be an independent country, not because I think we should sever links with the rest of the UK or turn our back on England, but because I think we should take political and economic responsibility and work together as partners with our friends and family across the UK on the basis of equality. So I've spent my entire adult life arguing for that. I, with many others, put my heart and soul into the referendum campaign. So I was devastated when we didn't win a yes vote in the referendum. So, there's very little in terms of a silver lining that I can put on that defeat. But something in Scotland during that referendum campaign last year changed. And I think it changed for many people who voted no to independence and who would vote no tomorrow if the referendum was repeated, as well as for people who voted yes. Because what happened in that campaign was a realisation, for the first time perhaps in any of our lifetimes, that the voice of people really mattered and that it could be heard. And what politicians learned was that if you give people something, a decision that they really care about, then they will take it seriously and they will engage in it and they will get involved. So Scotland became empowered. And, OK, the referendum didn't go how I wanted it to go, but I think there's a feeling right across Scotland that we don't want to go back the way, we don't want to lose that feeling of being in charge of our own destiny. And if we are to be, within the United Kingdom, still part of the Westminster system, we want to have a louder and more influential voice in that Westminster system. And I think that's what you saw expressed in the general election result.
Why do you think it was such a... I mean, the result of the general election, I mean, for those who have got lives and don't follow the intricacies of UK politics that closely, I mean, what the SNP did in Scotland was phenomenal. There are, I think, 59 electoral districts, and the SNP, having previously had 6, won 56 of them, and the other parties were completely wiped.
We're still having the internal inquiry into what happened in the other three. Okay.
Yeah. But why do you think it was, I mean, you got, I think, 45% or so in the referendum. Why did you do so much better in the general election? I mean, it was phenomenal.
I think for the reason I've just said, people came out of the referendum thinking, and people who voted yes wanted to make sure that that sense of the country being empowered and moving forward continued. And many people, not everybody, but many people who voted no, nevertheless want Scotland to have a stronger voice in the Westminster system, and they see the SNP, voting SNP, as a way to secure that. So that's why we did. I also think, and it's for other people to judge, I'm the leader of the SNP, so I'm clearly not objective and unbiased when I say these things, but I think the SNP, in the way we campaign, we offer a sort of positivity about Scotland. We talk about Scotland's potential and what we can do as opposed to what we can't do. And I think people like that and people respond to that because it appeals to what I think is an innate optimism about people for all the cynicism and negativity of politics. People want to be motivated to vote for something rather than frightened out of voting for something.
Right, so why not use that result as a mandate to say what we need now is another referendum?
Because for the very reason that I've just outlined, many people who voted SNP on May the 7th in the general election would have voted no in the referendum last year, and they would vote no if the referendum was tomorrow. Now, why
So you're not going to argue for a referendum until you think you can win it?
Well, no, I'm not going to argue for another referendum until I think it's justified. So I think the conditions are such, A, that something has changed from the circumstances we had last year. You can't just ask a question again and again and again until you get the answer you want, tempting though it might be. But you can't do that. We had the referendum, so something has to change to say, look, the country needs to look at this again. And then, of course, people have to vote for the proposition of a second referendum. I can't just decide there should be another referendum. But in the general election, I made a very explicit commitment to people that if you voted SNP in the general election, then the day afterwards I wasn't going to come along and say, I see, you were really voting for independence or another referendum. Because in a general election, the reason over the last number of years, it wasn't always SNP policy, but for quite a long time now, we've said that the question of Scottish independence can only be settled in a referendum because people in a general election vote for all sorts of different reasons. They might vote SNP because they like our health policy or our policy on climate change. We can't assume that everybody voting SNP in an election supports independence.
But I think, didn't you say that this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime?
And if that's what people want, that's what will happen.
So it might not happen again, that there will be another referendum in your lifetime?
I don't know. That will be down to my role, or the role of the SNP, whoever happens to be the leader of the SNP. We will have the choice of deciding in a future Scottish Parliament election whether to propose another referendum. And as I've just said, I think before we would do that, we would have to judge that something had changed about the circumstances that prevailed last year. But then people have to vote for that. So
there's one next year. There
is a Scottish Parliament election next year. And before you ask me, I haven't decided. We haven't decided that yet.
Right.
But
I'm not going to ask you whether you've decided. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is, what don't you know now that you will know then that will make a difference to making that decision?
It's beginning to sound like Dick Cheney-ish here, the known unknowns and all the rest of it, but I can't see into the future. Now, this won't necessarily be a scenario that comes to its conclusion in advance of the 2016
You just said in your speech,
Scottish
politicians
election.
love targets. I want you to give me a target for the date of the next Scottish referendum.
I'm going to resist that temptation. I'm going to resist it. But you're asking me what might change, and albeit the time scale of this may be different to the next Scottish Parliament election, but there is another referendum looming across the UK on the UK's membership of the European Union. Now, what I'm about to say has lots of ifs in it, but bear with me. If in that referendum Scotland, as I think we would, but you can never be sure in a referendum, but I think Scotland would vote to maintain its membership of the European Union, but the UK as a whole might vote to come out of the European Union. Would that mean that people in Scotland might think, hold on, we should look at the question of independence again? It could. So that's something that may change circumstances. I don't know that it will, but it is a possibility. But, I can't see into the future. I can't tell you what those change of circumstances might be.
Did you welcome President Obama intervening in that debate and saying that it would be mad for Britain not to be part of the EU?
Did we work on President Obama?
No, did you welcome?
Did I welcome him? I thought you said, did we work on him? I think if we worked on him, we might have gone to say something slightly different.
I must learn to articulate more clearly.
I remember very clearly the day President Obama made the comments that he made, and I have to say I thought he made those comments in a very, very measured and diplomatic way, although I guess most people knew what he was trying to say. But there was a strange effect, I thought, in Scotland as a result of the Obama comments, and perhaps one that people wouldn't have predicted, and it wouldn't have been universal. But I remember speaking to people and getting the strong sense that they'd heard President Obama talking about Scotland and suddenly thought, hold on a minute, the President of the United States is talking about Scotland. We must be really important, and why is he talking about it? It's because we're having this referendum. My goodness, if we were independent, the entire world would be talking about. So there was a strange kind of, on the part of some people, that sort of made them think, hold on, we're... And it was part of that empowerment. Suddenly our voices mattered and our voices were being heard. So some of the interventions that were undoubtedly intended to be unhelpful for the yes side in the referendum, I don't think always worked out that way.
I've got two more questions for you, before we open it up, because I want to hear your voices as well. This first one is a big question, and I hope you can kind of distill it. But I want to know, politics north of the border in Scotland has changed so much to, I think, where the political centre of gravity is in England. Your messages on austerity, social justice, kind of a lot of the economic case that you just made out about the living wage, very, very different. And it used to be the case when I first started reporting politics X number of years ago. You'd go up to Scotland, there were a large number of Scottish Conservative MPs. I think there's one. There used to be a huge number of Labour MPs. There is one. And there used to be a huge number of Liberal Democrat MPs, and there is one. And the rest of it is SNP. What happened?
That is a big question, and there's no single answer to that. I mean, yes, there used to be a bigger number of Conservative MPs in Scotland, but, you know, and certainly for most of my memory, voting patterns in Scotland have been different to voting patterns in England. There was a sense, certainly when I was growing up and Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, that the Conservatives didn't chime very much with Scotland. The values that the Conservatives espoused were contrary and conflicted a lot with the values of Scotland. So Scotland started to reject in a harder and harder way the Conservatives. What's happened with Labour, you know, the received wisdom is that the referendum broke the bond between the Scottish people and the Labour Party. I think it started much, much earlier than that. As Labour has gravitated more towards where the Conservatives sit on the political spectrum, and the SNP offer an alternative to that. And then the referendum, I think, was, for the Scottish Labour Party, the final breach for many people, as they seemed to align themselves with the Conservatives and try to scare Scotland into voting against independence. And there's a multitude of other things that have happened along the way. But, you know, whatever your politics, party politics, whatever your politics in terms of the big independence question, politics is fantastic in Scotland just now. Yeah, you know, some people hurl abuse at others on Twitter, and that's all, you know, none of us like that. I certainly don't like that. But the political discourse and the political debate and the political engagement and empowerment in Scotland is like nothing I have ever experienced. And long, long may we, you know, cherish that, and long may it continue.
Okay, Mark. I promised this would be my final question. Is it worth my while tuning in at 11 o'clock tonight to The Daily Show? Because I don't know whether, when we talked about the day, just before Nicola Sturgeon came here, she taped with Jon Stewart. I mean, there are scary things to do, and there are scary...
That was terrifying.
What was it like?
It was terrifying. Not helped by the fact that when they advertised my appearance on the show over the weekend on the show's website, they billed me as a comedian. So I had visions of this audience, you know, expecting that I was going to come out here tonight and tell lots of jokes. And as you know, I'm a politician, we don't really do humour. So it was a bit scary, but I'll leave it to you to judge. I think I just about got away with it.
Fantastic.
At least I hope I did.
I'm sure everyone will be watching when they go home tonight to watch it. Right, please. Questions, thoughts, interventions. There is a roving microphone. Come on, I can't believe... Yes, gentlemen.
Michael Gray from The National in Common Space in Scotland. Obviously, it was focused on business and society. I was going to ask about balancing business and human rights. Do you think Scotland should encourage trade with countries like Saudi Arabia, or discourage trade until human rights improvements are made?
Michael, before I answer your question, I should say thank you very much for being here. Michael is a journalist, a very good journalist in Scotland. He came to New York for a holiday to get away from Scottish politics for a couple of weeks. And then I decided to stalk him by coming here as well. So thank you for being here. Look, I believe human rights should be at the heart of everything we do in business and our society. And, you know, I think all companies have to have ethics and ethical business practices at the heart of what they do. One of the big things that really appalls as well as, you know, scares me at the moment is the suggestion in the UK that the UK will pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights and repeal its own human rights legislation. That would be a a massive retrograde step, and one that I certainly hope the UK doesn't take.
I know you don't run foreign policy, but can you have an ethical foreign policy in the way that Robin Cook, when he became Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, you always have to make judgments, and there's balances in these things. But yeah, I think in anything, whether it's foreign policy or business practice, if you don't start out with the intention of trying to behave ethically, then you're going to go wrong pretty quickly. So it should be a motivation for businesses, just as it should be for politicians in every aspect of what we do.
Yeah, another question. Lady there.
Hello, Nicola. My name's Adriana Moretti. I'm an Italian Scot, which I know you know there's plenty of in Glasgow. So I come from a family of restaurateurs, and I now have a restaurant in New York. So we really try to raise awareness of Scotland and the communities that make up Scotland, and we're not all just a bunch of Scottish people. There's there's Indians, there's the Chinese, and there's the Italians. I find sometimes there's a roadblock when it comes to the connection of getting the Scottish Government involved in a larger way. Like, we would be a great platform for getting the word out about Scotland. We've got the first Italian tartan in the restaurant, created by Michael Lametti in Falkirk, who owns a chip shop. And so my question
What's your restaurant?
Incognito, you're
I'm
coming
going
tomorrow
for lunch tomorrow.
I'm so excited.
But my question to you: Scottish cuisine or
we opened
Italian?
We opened primarily as Italian.
So somebody told me today that you do the best haggis.
We do. But we opened as Italians, and Americans would say to us how unusual, and I would say not at all.
Yeah.
So we decided to educate the New Yorkers and be like, there's a huge community. So my question to you is, people like my husband and I, who are a small business, we would love to get some support, not even money, just sort of recognition from the press about the message that we're trying to send out, the Scottish side, which is very strong. We do a Burns night, we do Tartan Day Parade. I'd love to march in the Columbus Day Parade with a bunch of kilts going down there as the Italian. Do you know what I mean? So you're doing your bit in Scotland. I'd love some help for us over here and around the world.
Yeah, well, it's our job to make sure we give you that. So before you go away tonight, or I'll see you tomorrow as well, make sure we swap details. Do you know our staff based here in the States? Yeah, where? Raymond's here from SDI, and Katie there, and Donnie. So, we need to help you be ambassadors for us and be ambassadors for the country. Fantastic.
How easy is it? How easy is it for you as First Minister to kind of ensure that the message is going out, around the world, and that people, you can bang the drum for Scotland?
I mean, we've got a great opportunity just now, and the interest in Scotland that I'm experiencing in New York this week is an illustration of this. Because of everything Scotland has gone through over the past year or so, our profile internationally is much higher than it's ever been before. So I'm determined we strike while the iron is hot.
Alan Cumming presenting the Tony Awards last night.
He was presenting the Tony Awards. I'm hopefully see him tomorrow. He's a fantastic ambassador for Scotland. But I'm the First Minister. I'm one person. I've got a big job to do, but I've got colleagues here. Lena Wilson from Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Development International, our staff based here. We've got a whole network of people whose job it is to raise the profile for Scotland, to encourage exports, to encourage investment, but to help communities who, whether here in the States or anywhere else in the world, who want to play their part in banging the drum for Scotland. I had breakfast this morning with the St Andrews Society of New York. Again, some people that were there this morning are here this evening doing fantastic work. Not in the case of the St Andrews Society, not just doing great work raising the profile of Scotland, but raising money for York Hill Children's Hospital back in Glasgow and the hospital here in New York. So there's many, many ways in which you can help us, and we are keen to help you do that.
More questions? Yes, somewhere in the cheap seats at the back there. Sir.
Yes, Madam First Minister, I would like to express, I believe, the opinion of everybody in this room, that in fact you do, by your appearance, do look like you just graduated from high school 4 years ago.
Is that it? Thank you. Can I just say to the particularly Scottish journalists in the room, why can't questions back home in Scotland be quite as inspired as that?
I'm slightly hurt he didn't say the same to me. Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Jim Malai. Scott lives in New York. Two things. One, I know the New York Scottish community pretty well, formal and informal, so I'm happy to help you. And I founded the Scotland Run, so in terms of it was quite successful. My question is a little more serious. In September, the UN plans to ratify 17 sustainability goals to see the world through 2030. These become the key goals for the planet. What kind of engagement do you hope to have in that?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's an important moment for the world. You know, this is, moving on from the Millennium Development Goals through to the Sustainable Development Goals that you speak about. I was speaking just on Sunday when I arrived in New York to the UK's ambassador to the United Nations about this very topic, and, you know, we'll seek to engage at every level. Scotland we're not an independent country. We don't have a seat in the United Nations. We don't have the ability to make those points directly, but we do have a lot of influence, we do have a loud voice, we do have a good record in terms of climate change, for example. You know, I understand one of the key issues at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals is around gender. We are doing great things in terms of gender balance just now, so we've got a lot to offer, both from our experience, but also our world view and how we think these things should develop. So we'll be seeking to maximise the influence we have in that regard.
I think gentleman there's got a microphone.
Hi, Mike Merrill. I'm with the Center for Labor Studies here in New York City at State University of New York, and I have a question about, I guess, my question concerns whether or not it is possible to achieve fairness in one country, and what, to borrow a phrase, and wonder if you could comment on how you see Scotland and the SNP helping or interacting with those looking both in England and in Europe generally to fight austerity programs, or are you focused pretty exclusively on Scotland, and with what effect?
I mean, that's a very good question. You know, I'm the First Minister of Scotland, so, you know, making sure that we govern Scotland well and that we, you know, seek to achieve our objectives in and for Scotland, of course, is our primary responsibility. But I'm a nationalist, but I'm first and foremost an internationalist. Your question, can you achieve fairness in one country? Well, I hope you can, but it's not enough just to seek to achieve it in one country. I want to see a world that is founded on much more fairness and equality than is the case at the moment. And, you know, the principal thing any country can do, whether it's large or small, is lead by example and put its own house in order, and that's what we're trying to do in Scotland. During the general election campaign, and remember, during the UK general election, the belief throughout that entire campaign was that the outcome of the general election was going to be a hung parliament, so neither Labour or the Conservatives were expected to get a majority. And it was predicted that the SNP would likely hold the balance of power in that hung parliament. So it was often put to me, how could we possibly, you know, want to or be capable of holding the balance of power and perhaps influencing government for the entire UK when we were a party that, you know, principally is focused on Scotland. And, you know, the argument I made then is that, you know, we wanted to and still want to reach out to others across the UK and across Europe to build progressive alliances for the kind of vision and the policies that I've been speaking about. And I hope the SNP, whether, you know, people agree with everything the SNP stands for or not, I hope the SNP does illustrate very powerfully that you can be a nationalist party while being very outward-looking and internationalist and progressive as well. And that's not always the reputation or the characterisation of nationalist parties. So that's very much the philosophy that we bring.
Oh.
And that clearly went down very well.
There you go. Okay, well, you'll need an invoice for that. Yes. Yeah, please.
Hi, Nicola. I've met you once before in Pollock Shaws. I used to be the chairperson for the Shawlands Business Association.
Of course, yes. Hi.
Amy McKenzie. Hi. Yeah, tonight I'm here in the capacity of the Glasgow Girls Club, who are a female educational empowerment organisation for working with low-income girls in Glasgow. We founded ourselves a year ago almost. The notion of having a Glasgow Girls Club started 2 years ago when I came to live in New York. My dad's actually from here, and I became aware of a fantastic organisation that's existed in New York for 15 years, I think, the Lower East Side Girls Club, who are doing a wonderful job here in the Lower East Side of working with the most impoverished girls of that area. There's a lot of statistics, incarcerated parents and the families, but they do some fantastic work. And
Can I ask you to get to the question, would you mind? Sorry, it's just that we're very short on time and I want to bring in a couple of other people.
Yep, so based on you looking to get some good practice from your visit here, and your message of you becoming the leader of the Scottish Parliament, and that becoming a good message to girls and women from any background. What do you look to as your strategy, or do you have a particular strategy for the next few years focusing on female equality within the Scottish area?
For me, gender equality is one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about, and I want to seek to use whatever influence I have as the first woman to be the First Minister of Scotland to advance opportunity for other women and girls in Scotland, and hopefully hold out some small example to girls everywhere. And what's my approach to that? Firstly, it's to live by example. I'm a working class girl from a small village in Ayrshire, first in my family to go to university, and I'm living proof that if you're good enough and work hard enough, you can achieve what you want. You shouldn't be held back because of your gender, and I want to try to send that message to girls and women across Scotland. I also am determined to lead by example. One of the first things I did when I became First Minister, when I appointed my first cabinet, was to make sure it was gender balanced. And let me say, because it was often asked of me in the days after that, could I say hand on heart that all the women in my cabinet were there on merit? Interestingly, nobody asked me that about the men in my cabinet. Not a single person asked me that question. And yes, everybody is there on merit, but I made the conscious decision to gender balance that cabinet. We're putting a big effort behind 50-50 in boards and in companies, and about to launch a big campaign around that in Scotland. So this is something I feel passionately about, and I'd be really happy to talk to you about your organisation and see if there's anything I can do to support it. And who knows, maybe before too long, the most powerful democracy in the world will also lead by example by electing its first woman leader. Maybe.
And I should say that Nicola is going to, I think I'm right in saying you're going to stay behind for the reception afterwards for a little while. So if you don't get a question now, you will be able to speak to Nicola afterwards. I'm going to take two final questions. I think there's someone here, and I think there was, the microphone's coming to you, and we'll go to the gentleman at the end there with the blue shirt, just behind you. Yeah.
Hi, so John Walker. I actually teach in social enterprise at Columbia Business School, so I was interested to hear all you were saying there about the social enterprise focus. Scotland, I think, and the UK is seen certainly as a centre of excellence in social business and how you structure that and how you bring society into it. You've mentioned export a lot in the focus as well, and I'd be interested to know what initiatives you have to help export Scotland's sort of excellence and business practices in the social business arena. Very interesting.
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman there. And is there anyone else I've left out who's itching? Itching. Okay, we'll go to that gentleman as well at the end.
Hi, I'm Michael. Like him, I left Scotland to avoid the politics. I'm really glad that you actually came on and refreshed it. But here's my question. I've lived in New York now for 20 years. It's a great country, it's a great city. We really value innovation the way you're talking about, but it takes money. And here's my question. The Scotland bill that's just gone into the committee in Westminster, and the fact that it's not doing what the Smith Commission asked for, how can you do all the things, all the great things you're talking about? It sounds wonderful. How do you do it without cash? And what will you do to do in the amendment stage of the Parliamentary Commission? What will you do to make those changes? And here's my last question.
Okay,
is
quickly.
that something that would be a deal breaker that we spoke about earlier? Something about not something, but you're talking about the referendum in Europe. Would the fact that not getting what you need from the Scotland Bill, would that ever fail?
Okay, 3 big economic questions to finish with. Should we go in order? Right, boosting exports.
Well, I think the question was how we export our expertise around social business and social enterprise. I think it's a great question. I think I mentioned in my speech that we learn from others in terms of, you know, getting better at social enterprise, and I think we've now got fantastic experience and a good track record, and you know, we need to make sure we're exporting that expertise. I'd be really, Lena Wilson's Chief Executive of Scottish Enterprise. I think it'd be really good to make a connection there about how we can do that better. But it's, you know, it's a good example of, you know, Scotland the brand, Scotland the you know, with all of the different attributes we've got, you know, that is as much of a valuable export as the Scotch whisky and the salmon and the Scottish beef that we all enjoy as well. Do you want me to go on to the second question?
Go on, which one? We can do whichever one you want to do.
Okay,
next.
the second one about
The Scotland Bill. And
yeah, you started on innovation actually, and how, you know, you're right, we need to invest in innovation. So before I go on to the constitutional bit of that question, you know, we're working very hard to use the wherewithal we've got, whether that's financial resources or the powers we've got, to make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is and backing the innovation that we need for our economy to grow. So looking at Lena again, we've established a Scottish Investment Bank that Scottish Enterprise runs for us to try to make sure that we are doing exactly that. On the wider question of the Constitution, you know, the Smith Commission bill that started going through the House of Commons today is not everything I would want, you know, clearly, and we will try as that bill goes through the House of Commons to strengthen it, to try and ensure that the powers that will be devolved to the Scottish Parliament are meaningful powers, and that they are joined up and they provide the Scottish Government with, you know, a cohesive set of powers that we can use properly to get our economy growing and tackle poverty and do all the things I was talking about. You're right, it falls short at the moment, not just on the ambition I would have for it, but on meeting the detail of what Lord Smith proposed. So we'll work hard during the process of that bill to get it to where Lord Smith wanted it to be, as well as to hopefully take it beyond that. I'm not, you know, I don't think it's helpful at the start of a parliamentary process to sit and say, oh, and if you don't do what we want, we'll go off and have another referendum. But there is a fundamental point here about how Westminster and the Westminster establishment responds to the general election result in Scotland. And I had this conversation directly with the Prime Minister just the week after the election. You know, he and his government can just act as if it's business as usual with politics in Scotland, and you know, people will draw their own conclusions from that. And the conclusion may be that Westminster's unreformable, that it's not capable of responding and delivering a better deal for Scotland, or actually Westminster can do something different and listen and say, we're going to try to respond. So I think the jury's out on which way it will go, and we'll see how that develops. And was it Stephen? I mean, I think the big priority here has to be to make sure that the conditions that allowed the financial crash to happen are not allowed to happen in future. You know, we must not allow ourselves to have lived through the financial crash of the last few years and to know, you know, and to know to, you know, a fair degree of detail and level of understanding what happened and why it happened and what it was in policy and the failure of policy and the failure of regulation that allowed that to happen. You know, we cannot allow it to happen all over again, and that's what the focus, not just of the government in the UK has to be, that has to be the focus of governments across the Western world and the international community as well. And if we lose focus on that, then we'll be doing a massive disservice to the next generation.
And there we're going to leave it. When I had kind of various conversations about hosting this evening, I said, do you want me to keep it strictly to time? What about questions? And the only message that came back to me was, no, she'll want to answer all the questions that are thrown. I've chaired a number of events with politicians. Not all of them are like that, which might explain why Nicola Sturgeon is quite so popular in Scotland. And a lot of people in England were saying during the election, why can't we have a political leader like Nicola Sturgeon? Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much indeed.